Welcome to the Quality Meat Scotland podcast. Industry updates and best practice to promote, support, develop and protect the Scottish red meat sector.
Hello, and thank you very much for listening to this. I'm Mark Stephen. There won't be a business anywhere in the UK at the moment that isn't looking long and hard at how to reduce costs and maximise outputs, and that holds particularly true for farmers. Farmers might not be able to control fuel and energy costs, but they can control what they grow and when they grow it, and that can make a big difference. Charles Murray is a seed merchant, agronomist and self-confessed hobby farmer. He and his wife Irene run Clyde Agriculture Seeds Limited in Carluke. They advise on and formulate grazing mixtures. Charles, thanks for agreeing to do this.
Thank you.
And Andrew Houston farms Glencurley with his parents. It's a 2,500 acre hill farm near Blairgowrie. They've got suckler cows, over 1,000 ewes and some red deer hinds. Again, thank you for your time, Andrew.
No bother, Mark. Looking forward to this.
Good. Well, Charles, if somebody phones you up asking for advice on grazing or silage, what are the first questions you ask them?
The first questions that we need to establish answers to are the aspirations of the crop, the land or soil type in which it's grown, and the weather conditions in which it's likely to endure.
And once you've got a handle on all that, what is it, to your mind, that farmers should be trying to do? I mean, what's the sort of the golden objective?
Well, I think you've touched earlier on the rising costs, and that's the thing that we've got to consider now, is the cost of production and what contribution their grassland can make to reducing these costs. And that's when we consider the introduction of legumes, percentage of legumes, size and types of legumes, etc., as well as the rooting depths of the various grasses to try and maximise production with the minimum use of artificial fertiliser in many cases.
So obviously legumes, you're trying to fix nitrogen in the soil without having to spray little white pellets on it.
Correct, yes. The little expensive pellets that are now at 6 times the value they were very recently, and we can produce grass with no fertiliser at all if we adopt the right management and the appropriate stopping rate and the appropriate selection of species within the mixture.
So given those parameters and those aspirations, Andrew, how does that fit in to the system you currently use?
So we've been working with Charlie for several years now, Mark, and we threw an idea at him a few years ago about trying a bit of red clover. This was 5 years ago now, long before we've seen these ridiculous price increases that we're all so concerned about just now. What initially brought us round to the idea of red clover was the protein content of the crop. Where we are with no arable, we're entirely a grassland unit. All our concentrate feeds have to come in. We buy a lot of straw in. We were keen to try and produce as much as we could at home. So that's where the clover idea first came about. Year one, we baled silage at over 19% protein, so it ticked that box straight away. Now we're in the position where we're having to pay through the nose for fertiliser. It's a win-win because the crop's still performing without the use of artificial fertiliser, and we're still getting really good silage analysis. We're using that crop in a couple of different ways. Our first cut's gone into the floor of the silage pit, and our wean calves will be wintered on a mix which is roughly 50-50 grass silage and red clover silage, and then we top it up with a pellet. And some years we'll also use that red clover silage in a TMR for our cows. Because it's high protein content, it allows us to feed less silage and more straw in the diet. Before we were using both pot ale syrup and Invercrombie's byproducts to distill the industry, with the kind of biomass starting to step into the distillery world. Getting those products was becoming harder and more expensive, and we're in a safer position now, being able to grow that crop at home and produce a bit of protein at home.
It's always very difficult to prove a negative or even try and assess a negative sometimes, but where are you now financially, and where could you have been had you not adopted these changes?
It's probably early days yet, because we're maybe not seeing the actual effects of all these price increases just fully. We bought our fertiliser a hell of a lot dearer than we'd have liked, but other than that, not much has changed yet. Going forward, it is quite worrying. We've put another field into red clover last year. We've another one with seeds sitting in the shed we brought from Charlie. Was going to go in the ground after silage this year. We had a wee bit of a review and we've decided to sow it next spring, mainly because of a weed problem. So going forward, we are going to be putting more and more of it in the ground because it's just not viable to be spending that kind of money on fertiliser alone to produce winter feed for our cattle and our sheep. It's not the only cost. The cost of the plastic's gone through the roof. We've got the diesel, the contractors' charges. It's kind of attacking us from all angles. So yeah, it's quite worrying going forward just where we could be if we keep seeing things going the way they are.
Charles, how do you go about extending the grazing season?
There's various strategies you can bring in. I mean, overall stocking rate has got to be the first consideration. Extending the grazing season, for me, the first step is you need to rest areas and utilise them at different ends of the season. So if you're looking for grass in late February through to early April, usually after early April, grass comes anyway, but management can bring grass availability forward by quite a number of weeks, and that's purely by resting. So there is a rotational grazing system in place now, and there are many people that have appeared on your various publications and monitor farms, etc., that have adopted these systems. In winter, we're looking for 90 days rest. In summer, we're looking for 18 to 20. So it's about planning and adopting, and the potential to have grazing into early November is quite feasible, and then to start in early March or even February is quite feasible. There is a gap within that where it becomes a little bit harder, and there has been some very successful deferred grazing practices in place that have operated over 12 months. But the option is for the introduction of brassica crops, which will fill that gap period when grass production is limited.
Andrew, how do you go about filling that gap?
That's a tricky one. Unfortunately, as much advice as we took from Charlie, I don't know if we could get grass to grow in Glenshee at the end of February. You never know, it might happen one day. As far as grassland management here is concerned, there's no doubt we're going to have to go more down the route of rotational grazing. We do have a severe lack of water system on the farm, so that's probably the next thing we really need to start investing in to improve our grassland management. We touched on the red clover from the silage point of view. I think it's our biggest hope from the silage perspective, but as far as the grazing management's concerned, to get away from fertiliser there, we really need to look at infrastructure to make our grassland management more doable. We've been growing forage crops on the farm for years. Dad's always been doing it, and since I've come home, we've now gone down the route of using a direct drill. The main reason we got onto that was actually to get away from stones. So we're very, very rocky ground up here. Any kind of cultivation at all, and the volume of stone that we bring to the surface is quite depressing. So we started using a direct drill. We burn off, we round up as soon as we can after lambing time, try and get our forage crops drilled late May, early June, and they're coming away quite nicely now. And that's our easiest tool here, I think, to extend the grazing season. So we do a few different things with them. We've got some direct drill sweds this year we're going to be grazing our hinds on. So they'll start that just as the rut's starting to come to a close, and we'll graze hinds and calves on that until weaning time. And then we've a couple of fields in a mixture of a stubble turnip and red start, and our in-calf heifers, they're out the hill just now. We've pulled them off from the bull. They'll be out the hill till sort of October, late October time, and then they'll come in off the hill and they'll be strip grazed that along with a bit of some of our poorer quality baled silage as far through the winter as it lasts. And we've also got some late sown turnips, which we will put lambs on to finish on them. it's not necessarily deferred grazing that's happening here or a way of extending our own personal grazing season, but we do work quite closely with a few reasonably local arable farmers. We're doing a few different things with them. One guy's sowing a stubble turnip after peas, and we put lambs down to him. And another chap's undersowing a lot of his spring cereals and winter and sheep for us. We're getting the benefit of having sheep on grass all year round, and he's getting the benefit of a bit of dung going back onto the ground, as well as a nice little paycheck at the end of it.
If you've got problems with, basically water infrastructure on your farm or water availability on your farm, what kind of season has this been? Because it's been pretty dry.
Well, we're actually in a very, very fortunate position here. We've had rain that even the other side of the hill hasn't had. We've got to a point where we're almost starting to dry up, and we've had another downpour. So we've been very lucky. I was up in Orkney a couple of weeks ago, and all the way up, I've seen the effect in the drought on many places, and got up to Orkney, and they've had the exact opposite. They've had a beautiful growing season, and we've been very lucky here too and had that ourselves. But it is a concern going forward how quickly things can dry up, and I'm sure there's some parts of the country that are panicking just now because they have seen so little growth compared to a normal year.
And Charles, are seed producers looking at climate change trends and thinking, well, hang on a second, are there variants here that can actually do with less water?
I'm not certain that grass breeders are looking at this. I think it's already looked at. We have already a wide range of grasses to choose from, and rooting depth is key, but so also is companion. So if you have, for example, any monoculture single variety, then you would be more exposed to water uptake throughout the season than you would be if you had a number of varieties and, more importantly, a greater number of species. So where we have broad-leaved, where we have deep rooters, and even where we have shallow rooters, and interaction across these varying species will help to aid water retention. But the biggest thing in my book for water retention and dry conditions is a rest period. So if you can allow some canopy recovery between grazing visits, then you will be able to retain moisture better that way. Additional species that you would look at would be deep-rooting dry grasses, the tetraploids, the hybrids, Italian, cocksfoot are all the lightland species that we'd look at first, together with red clover again would come in first because it roots deeper and is a taproot plant compared to the whites. So it's a balance of everything, as normal, as all farming is.
And when it comes to resting things, are most farmers moving their animals on quickly enough, if I'm putting that correctly? I came across a lovely phrase the other day, and I think it was from the 1950s in England, where a farmer said, basically, he says, I don't want my sheep hearing the same church bells in the same field 2 weeks in a row.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And that one carries. I've heard it too, and from many different sources. The practice of rotational grazing was in place in the 60s. I remember in my childhood in the early 70s when we all used to not have a smile when we were told we're going to have to help to shift the cows from one field to another. So pre-fertilizer, rotational grazing was already in practice, though it may actually have been 3 fields on the farm, all grazed and rested over a relevant period. We've upgraded that now. A lot of advice now is suggesting 3 days on and 16 to 18 days off. If that can be practiced on a farm, it is the first step to reducing fertilizer cost, retaining moisture, and minimizing reliance on anthelmintics, because the church bell ringing was linked to worm exposure in sheep.
And Andrew, have you made any changes at all to the way you're actually making silage?
Not really, no. Other than sat down when we opened up the contractor's bill. No, we've not done much yet, but certainly there's going to have to be a lot of considerations going forward. We've quite a good capacity in our silage pit, whether we look to extending that to allow us to put more silage in the pit, It's obviously cheaper and quicker to make, and it's cheaper and quicker to feed out. The bales do fit really well into our system, however, with the sheep, because we're feeding a lot of sheep out on hill ground, and there's nothing more simple than taking a bale of silage out to them in the winter. What was quite interesting, actually, when I was up in Orkney, I visited a couple of friends, and they're moving onto forage wagons now, mainly due to the lack of machinery and labour and days they can actually get it done. But what's quite interesting is hearing how much fuel they're saving, as well as machinery savings, and moving to that system.
Charles, are there alternatives to traditional silage making?
Well, yes, there are, but whether they are better alternatives is down to the individual business. Of course, there are. There are many farms keeping livestock with no traditional silage at all. But I think silage is so common because it's safe. You can set your watch almost by when it's ready to cut, depending on the management that's gone before, the rest period, etc. But it's a safe, simple, weather least sensitive, if that makes sense, because wet summer, dry summer, you can make silage from grass. You only need a day dry and things can happen. So I think for getting through the winter, it will always be the foundation. And for many units, although extended grazing through grassland management, selection of grass types, introduction of brassicas, I think there's always going to be a period for a lot of units where silage will still be very much a part of getting through the winter.
And if you're changing some of the stuff you do, Andrew, has that had an impact on the number of animals you've got on the farm? Has it gone up, down, stayed the same? What?
We've done the exact opposite to what we said we were going to do, actually, Mark. When we put the deer on, the deer are quite a new thing. My wife and I had a bit of a dream to put some deer on, and we made it a reality 4 years ago. That ground, we had about 400 blackface ewes up there, and we summered some cows up there too. So the intention was always to reduce both the sheep and the cattle numbers as the deer went on. But somehow the cow numbers have slightly sneaked up, as have the sheep. But going forward, that's not how we intend to keep things. We've bulled slightly less cows this year, and we've pulled the bulls out a little bit earlier. And we've also taken on another unit where we've got 500 ewes on contract there, so we've a bit more on our plate out with the farm. So I can't see the ewe numbers getting any higher. Going forward, though, it might be the easiest thing to do, cut the stock numbers back so we can cut out a lot of the inputs, make life just that wee bit easier. One big change we have made is the breeds we're using. We were nearly all Limousin, we're now nearly all Angus. Trying to breed a smaller, more compact, low maintenance cow that can live off our environment for a lot longer and doesn't need so much pampering during the winter. That's probably the biggest change we've made over the years to try and cut our costs a bit with the stock.
You know, it's fascinating, Charles. We're the same age, and we've both seen the changes in farming across our lifetimes, etc. It is going back to the way it was.
I would agree entirely, and I think we need to consider very carefully how people farmed in the 50s. And when I say that, I don't mean let's go back to horses and wheelbarrows, but the systems that were adopted then, I think, is what we need to adopt now, because economics dictate that we can't afford expensive fertilizer, expensive fuel, expensive machinery, and expensive feed when it's imported onto the farm at current levels. And if the out for red meat is going to have a ceiling on its price because of the current cost of living crisis, then the only way that farmers can stretch a profit out of the current environment is to eliminate these high costs.
It's interesting, if you're going back, Andrew, to the way things were and trying to spend less to produce the same amount of material, etc., I wonder how long those changes, that different mindset will take to extend to the food retailers, the supermarkets and the like.
Yeah, well, that's a very good point, Mark. We've learned a lot this last few years since we started marketing our own meat. Learned a lot about consumers, what they want, how they want it. The most frustrating thing is roast beef. We always struggle to sell our roasts, and that's down to, I think, two things. One's probably the price of the product, because they're buying a big lump of beef versus maybe buying a smaller single meal package. But the other's the mindset of consumers nowadays. They want a quick, easy meal. They want to come home from their work, pop it in the pan, eat it straight away. Gone are the days of the roast going in at Sunday lunch and living off it for the week. And it's not just us that's finding that. I've spoken to a couple of bigger, procurement officers who are saying that similar kind of things are happening at their end too. So a lot of us are looking at these native and older genetics to reduce the cost, but they're also finding that they're maybe going to suit the market better going forward. Although they might not match the grid we're working with at the moment, they're probably going to be more the type of cattle the consumer's going to want in the future.
And again, Charles, this ties in. It's amazing how many strands are sort of knotted in the centre. Are you seeing a shift in emphasis towards, I mean, are people phoning you up saying, look, I want to try more regenerative farming. I want to put the sort of, I want to concentrate on soil health, that kind of thing?
Yes, the soil health, that has been a big topic in the last 4 or 5 years. We have some experience in regenerative farming. The difficulty I'm seeing so far is the determination to establish new plants and species on a farm without using the plough. And we have tried a number of direct drilling approaches there with a whole range of species. And it's tricky. You've got to stand by for failures when you're doing that. When we loosen soil and sow straight in, especially old grass, then we can start to turn things round quicker. However, regenerative farming doesn't encourage tillage. So to date, it's a choice. If you're moving onto a farm, which is, let's say, all grass, and you want to go down the regenerative strategy, then at the moment it's a choice of glyphosate or the plough. Because when we use neither, the results are disappointing. So direct drilling into grassland without either glyphosate for old layer removal or ploughing has proven to be very difficult to date. There are some strategies that are still being considered, using canopies of heavy layering of straw to remove the turf and get going. But the emphasis on soil health has climbed the agenda. There is genuine interest from farmers, and I think there will be more and more interest in the produce coming from that in future as well. It's almost organic, but it's different. It's a more environmental approach. It's a more holistic approach, and it's trying to accommodate everything and every living species within the land surface. But it's hard to imagine how we can feed our population if entire agriculture moved over to regenerative tomorrow. I think there would be a reduction in overall food availability.
It must lead for some, I mean, because this doesn't happen quickly, because it can take, certainly a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years to actually see the impact of what you're changing. It must make for some very fascinating conversations.
Oh, yes, it does. In fact, it can extend one's farm visit by several hours. The enthusiasm for the topic is and it's shared both ways. But we still have to balance this with feeding the volumes, and the regenerative strategy. I mean, it starts with rotational grazing, of course it does. And when you look at regenerative across various parts of the world, then the grazing of ruminants is the foundation of the system. And I think as that develops, then we may find ourselves becoming regenerative. I think I mentioned earlier going back to farm pre-fertilizer as they did in the 50s. And the thing that sits strongest in my mind there is rotation. And that's where farms have a proportion of rotational grassland, cereal crops, and brassica or root crops. Now, there is strategies now that we can go back and consider growing cereals well up the glens of Scotland because of the options that there are to preserve grain that we didn't have back then, all the different moist preservatives, that systems that are available. So I think To rescue the short-term situation, I think it's a balance of rotational grazing and rotational farming, where crops are used to raise soil fertility and reduce the duration in which grassland is in the ground. And so its reliance on fertilizer in the springtime, again, is removed. But watch this space. It's going to be interesting times. But the economic pressure is making farmers have to think hard.
I was just saying, Andrew, this experimentation leads to some fascinating conversations, but is it fun to do?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I really enjoy doing a bit of research, seeing what folk are doing. I've been lucky to do a bit of travelling, see some different systems, different ideas. I think going forward, if we're going to survive as both individuals and an industry, we really need to start thinking outside the box. Stop worrying about what the hell our neighbours are thinking and go on and try some stuff out. It's the only way we'll find out whether particular crops or plants or systems are going to work on our own farms. Quite a few of the things we've tried have been thought up with Charlie over a dram at night. We're quite fortunate that when Charlie comes round our area, he comes to stay in my mum's bed and breakfast. So quite often the grass seed's bought after a dram or two. So we're quite fortunate we get that extra time with him just to come up with a few daft ideas, and we give it a go. Most things we've kind of achieved something or learnt something off the back. We've had the odd disappointment. We'd hope to try a bit of sandfoying up here. We managed to establish it, but we just couldn't get it to persist. It's similar characteristics to a red clover, and we'd hoped it would be a good companion, but unfortunately it's just not going to happen up here. So, yeah, no, it is exciting, and I think as plant breeding evolves, technology evolves, our climate changes, there's going to be a lot more options for us going forward, especially in our part of the world.
Andrew Houston, it's been really interesting talking to you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mark.
And similarly, Charles Murray, an education. I always learn from these podcasts, and thank you very much.
Not at all. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
I'm Mark Stephen. I hope you found this useful.
Thank you for listening to the Quality Meat Scotland podcast. For news and to listen back to previous episodes of the podcast, visit qmscotland.co.uk. For Scotch beef, Scotch lamb and specially selected pork recipe videos and inspiration, visit www.scotchkitchen.com or follow Scotch Kitchen on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter.